Well, muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon. It's good to see you all. Thanks for coming out and taking some time to really begin thinking a little bit about the future of teaching, the future of teacher education. We're really excited to have Dr. Barnett Berry here, who's going to be sharing some thoughts that he's developed really in collaboration with a group of teachers, a national group of teachers, really exploring the question about what will teaching look like in the year 2030. For those of you who might be interested, at 3 o'clock we're going to have another session called Teacher Education 2030. So if this one's looking at what is teaching going to look like, the 3 o'clock session will focus on what is it going to mean in terms of what teacher education ought to look like in 2030. And this evening at 7 o'clock at the Watka Museum in the Rotunda Room, there'll be a community event. It's free. It's open to the public. If you want to come in, he's going to, sounds like Barnett's going to do kind of a combination of the two presentations together. So we had a great dinner last night. I think you're really in for a treat. I remember when I was a college student, there was a famous kind of saying that was really perpetuated by the radicals in the 60s at the time, which was, don't trust anybody over 40. And you think about how quickly knowledge has changed and technologies have changed. Probably it's appropriate to say don't trust anybody over 30 now, because really if you think about it, and it's a point that Barnett makes in his book, he argues that even if you're 30, you're going to be seen as an old fogey when it comes to new ways of accessing knowledge and using knowledge for all kinds of social and personal purposes. So those of you who are approaching 30 probably never thought of being, 29 or 30 and then also being thought of as an old fogey, right? But that's really what the new dynamic, the new times are creating for us in terms of the way that we think about things. And one of the things that I guess I know that Barnett was really excited to come and speak to students, because I think both him and me, we agree that you are really at the crux of being not just people who learn differently and who can teach differently, but you're going to be the people we're going to look to actually lead this movement. We're going to need young people who are just coming into the profession to say, look, the way that we learn is different, the way that we access knowledge is different, the way that we teach has to be different. I know that's how I learn, and I can lead and I can take an important leadership role. So we're really excited, and he's very excited about meeting with you all. Join me in giving a warm welcome to Barnett Berry.
Thank you. Thank you. So relatively small group, which is fabulous. So future teachers, mostly in the back, right? I see the thumbs up, right? I know we got an old fogey administrator, but still a lot younger than I am. I'm getting ready to turn 57, Greg, right? And teacher educators, right? Yeah. Okay. Any other category of terrific folk in the room? Okay, excellent. What I'd love to do, though, in the hour or so, and I'll be here till 2:30, and then not on till 3 o'clock too. So anybody who wants to continue to have the conversation.
Stay here, or yeah.
Oh, I might need one cup of coffee. That's about it. All I'm gonna need. But what I'd love to do is kind of focus on the future teachers in the conversation, and while I have a few pictures to kind of stir some thinking, and a short animated video to capture the big ideas of the book. And if you got this visual book summary, you'll recognize the caricatures and so forth, because the same designer who helped us with the video helped us do this animated book study. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to give a little more biographical bit about me. So my first year of teaching young folks in the back was well before you were a glitter in your parents' eyes. It was the late 70s, early 80s when I taught, which is still unfortunately typical today, only 3 years. And I taught in an urban high school, social studies, typical 167 kids that I taught over the course of 5 periods. Of course, being the new kid on the block, I was given the most challenging assignments in a school with 98% free and reduced lunch to begin with. And while I was asking for help, you'll appreciate this, Greg, as a superintendent, as a young teacher, I wanted help. principal and department chair rarely would come in, if at all. And finally they did, and when they came in, this is my second year of teaching, they came in with a student teacher because they thought I was doing the best job in the department. At age 23, they wanted me to mentor the teacher that was yet to even get her training, okay? And I will tell you that it made me think, as a sociology major, that if we could have created a more dysfunctional system of teacher development, we could not have done a better job. That in itself kind of led me to graduate school to study the profession that I quite frankly fled. Then led me to some work in a think tank in Washington, D.C. as a professor and starting my own research center. Then I got tired of just studying the problem that besets the teaching profession here in this country and wanted to do something about it. And so I skipped a few years in there, but about 14 years ago I started a nonprofit to advance teaching as a results-oriented profession, and we've actually morphed, and as we come to the conversation, hope at the end of our chance or talk today, that we'll get to how teachers themselves need to be connected, readied, and mobilized to transform their profession, because no one's going to do it for you. And if they do it for you, they'll do it to you and not for you and with you. And our organization is dedicated to helping teachers, working with administrators who want to do the right thing by the profession, to kind of build this occupation into the kind of profession it really needs to be. So that's kind of a short order biographical sort of statement on how I got here, and I'm very fortunate that while I have yet to be back in a classroom as a teacher in a very long time, I spent a lot of time both in and out of cyberspace with some of the best teachers in this country who educate me all the time, and in particular who work with me on this book project, Teaching 2030. So what I like to do is just start by just asking you a question. I'm going to stop talking almost immediately. How would you characterize the teaching profession? I'm just going to throw up just a couple of images here just to get your brains working. And by the way, no one in this room knows the image on the left, I don't think. Or maybe the right too, but actually the image on the left is, do you know this one, Francisco? No. That's Jennifer Jones in 1955 playing Miss Dove, the conservative, thoughtful, caring, disciplinarian, well-revered teacher in the small town, but still who had to adhere very rigidly to the guidelines of the school board of the day. But let me turn it over, and of course on the right-hand side you might see kind of the images of the factory esque sort of motif of the public school classroom and the expansion, quite frankly, of public education in this country to serve massive numbers of immigrants in the early part of the previous century, not even last century, but the century before that. So let me ask you though, what comes to your mind beyond these images of the teaching profession? Even for you young folks, you've been students in the public schools for at least 15,000 hours. You watched teachers. You were taught by teachers, right? Yes, sir.
Guidance.
Guidance?
This is the word that comes to mind.
Okay. Teachers as guides. Excellent. Okay. How's the public perceive teachers? Yes, ma'am.
I would describe it as undervalued and underappreciated.
Okay.
The word I was going to use is similar, beleaguered.
Beleaguered. Okay. Do you guys get a sense of that as prospective teachers, that the teaching profession is beleaguered? I see a little bit of nod. Come on. You can shake your head no. We can. Okay, if you say yeah, can I pick on you now? That was a big yes, young lady. So tell me, what do you know? What do you have sense? What have you learned about the teaching profession that you think it might be classified as beleaguered?
Well, my mama teaches at a Title I school, so, you know, like, they are high need. And, you know, parents come, they just drop their kids off and they leave, and, you know, their kids really need my mom's help, and
Right.
they just don't really care about what's going on in the school. It kind of feels like it's more of a babysitting situation for the parents instead of a really good education for your kiddo.
It will come back. That's really good, because so teachers are very much beset by societal circumstances, and the school itself still looks pretty much the same way it has always looked, by the way, right? So one thing interesting about the profession, if you did some time travel, okay, and you went back, you trained at WWU in a very progressive, thoughtful, erudite sort of way, I am certain. You're prepared to teach schools of today, as well as hopefully schools of tomorrow, I'm certain of that. But if you would time travel back to the 1950s, or even to the 1920s, you could fit in very easily. But if you were preparing yourself to go work at Google, okay, or its equivalent in the 1950s, which might be what IBM was in the 50s, which how they were beginning to move from time management into information generation and ideas, you could never fit as an employee at Google today if you time travel back in the 50s to IBM, but you can fit very easily if you're a teacher. So I want you to think about this image, these sets of images. Do y'all know any movie buffs here? I mean, some of these, again, some of you are a little young to even know, probably catch on to some of these images or films. You want to help us here? We want to describe the three teachers up there. You know the three of them?
The one on the right is Jimmy Mountain.
Yeah, I'm going to close this door, guys. Okay.
The one on the right is Jamie
Jaime Escalante, right?
He taught inner city Los Angeles math. And the real Jamie Escalante supervised the making of that movie.
Right, and
and so he worked with a bunch of kids that weren't supposed to even study math, that wound up passing the AP exam in calculus in inner city Los Angeles. Robin Williams is in the middle playing Poet Society.
Did Poet Society? John Keating was his name in the film, yeah.
And I'm not sure who's on the
Oh, that's Hilary Swank playing Erin Gruwell in Freedom Writers. Yes.
Freedom Writers Diary.
Yeah, very good. Do you know the movie, or the storyline? You want to help the students back here?
I don't know that much about it, but it's basically, I think it's also Los Angeles or California, but she basically works with a group of students to start writing about their lives and become writers because of that. They now have published a lot of their work, they travel around the country, and she still works with them in multiple generations.
Yeah, she's no longer teaching though. She burned out, much like Jaime Escalante, who actually died of a heart attack. And while John Keating was somewhat of a fictional character, they all worked heroically as individual teachers. And they set a frame for us in this country that you're either a heroic teacher who works 80 hours a week, irrespective of your personal life and your health, and you get things done for kids, and you are like Superman and Superwoman, or you are this. You might know this guy. Where's my sound? Where's it, right here?
Yeah, the knob.
Whoops. Now see the next image. I'm sorry guys, we should have got this tested here.
There we go.
In an effort to alleviate the effects of the anyone, Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? it did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay, so now we got three sets of images, right? We got the docile, conservative, caring pillar of the community, Miss Dove, right? We have the image of teachers working in factory-like settings. We've got waiting for Superman and Superwoman. And now we have Ben Stein, who plays the economics teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then we have, y'all probably saw this, right? This is more contemporary, right? Does anybody see this? Have anybody seen this movie? Bad Teacher? I refuse to see it. But you can why don't you tell everybody about Cameron Diaz in Bad Teacher?
Basically sums it up. She's just a really bad teacher, doesn't care about her students,
Right.
and is more interested in the social aspects of the other teachers and staff members.
Right, that's enough. I think what I read, she helps her kids cheat on the final exam, so she gets a performance pay bump and all that. But it's a terrible image, not worth spending any more time on. But these images prevail in both, not just in the cinematic world, okay, but in the world of policy and school reform. And oftentimes, much of the rules and regulations that policy makers enact build upon these images, either the extraordinary teachers and the way since they're kind of born teachers, you don't have to prepare them much. All they got to do is be smart and work hard. Or the pedantic ones that need to have merit pay to incentivize them to do something they wouldn't do otherwise. Or then the horrible teacher that's got to be fired. Those are the three different images, and most of the public policy in this country today, in the almost middle of the second decade of the 21st century, is still in the middle of many debates that have been playing out in this country for really 5 or 6 or 7 decades. We're not debating about the future of the 21st century teaching profession. At best, we're debating about the 20th century teaching profession, and we're focusing solely on the excellent teacher who will work like crazy, or the bad teacher that needs to have incentives to do something different, or even fired. Two images from, of course, this is not the reason they're out of business now in the print, but Time Magazine and Newsweek in the last couple of years had two images. Did anybody recognize these images, or the woman on the left-hand side? Michelle Rhee, have y'all heard about Michelle Rhee?
DC schools.
DC schools, and with that image of her broom sweeping out all the bad people and the corruption, is a very powerful image that's been out there. And she is on the talk show circuit, has her own advocacy organization now. And then on Newsweek, put out a cover, this was just 2 years ago, the key to saving American education. Can you all read in the cheap seats in the back what's on the blackboard? Not even a whiteboard or a smart board, but on the blackboard. Can you all read what it says?
Must fire bad teachers.
We must fire over and over and over again. Yeah. So this doesn't jive much, my friends. The American people, consistently when asked, do you have trust and confidence in today's teachers? The vast majority of them say yes. This particular poll from Gallup, 2012, I think this was from 2011, but the 2012 poll came up and said exactly the same thing. 71% of the American people have trust and confidence in today's teachers. But still, teachers sit at the bottom of this kind of vast organizational pyramid, and this 3D image doesn't quite get it. We're still working on the graphic here. but there are 3.2 million teachers, pretty much at the bottom of a policy system that is highly centralized, with most of the power at the state level in most places around the country, not at the federal level, but the feds do have enormous authority with about 10% of the budget, especially in terms of working with high needs kids. And very few teachers have roles that they played in the years past. I mean, excuse me, very few teachers have roles that they played in years past, different roles. Most every teacher today still teaches in the same kind of configuration as their predecessors. So most likely, I'm picking on you, you will probably end up in a school system where what you do from 7 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 4 o'clock, or 5 o'clock, or 6 o'clock, looks very much like what your mother's doing today. Okay? Even the way she may have taught 20 years ago in the roles she played. It doesn't have to be that way. So I'd like for you to think about what the future of teaching might be by thinking about some key ideas from Teaching 2030.
You may have noticed, there's a lot of talk about improving the performance of our teachers and our schools, but it can feel like moving a mountain. How would we even begin? Well, researchers tell us that teachers make a big difference in how much students learn, even in the most challenging schools, and that's important to know. It doesn't mean we ignore the issues of poverty or parenting or the many children who come to school with English as a second language, but recognizing this simple truth, that better teaching helps all students achieve more, gives us a foundation to build a school system worthy of American ideals. Unfortunately, most reformers ignore how challenging teaching in the 21st century really is. To get the job done right, we need millions of well-prepared, highly savvy teachers to teach for a career, not just a job, and to spread their expertise to their colleagues. We have to pay attention to the world's changing landscape so we can empower teachers to reach the educational mountaintop. In the classrooms of today and tomorrow, there are 5 things teachers must know how to do. 1. Teach the Google learner. Nowadays, students can find out everything about anything with a few taps of the finger. 2. Partner with a student body that's increasingly diverse. By 2030, 40% or more students will be second language learners. 3. Prepare kids to compete for jobs in a global marketplace. In our highly connected world, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creative problem solving are the new basics. 4. Help students monitor their own learning. Digital tools allow students to learn 24/7 and authentically demonstrate what they know. Teachers will deploy sophisticated tools to assess whether students meet academic standards, and they'll fine-tune instruction when they don't. 5. Connect teaching to a broader spectrum of community needs. Increasing economic turmoil creates family and societal instability, and it pushes schools to integrate health and social services into academics. Our book, Teaching 2030, outlines the big ideas that will make it possible for teachers to meet 21st century demands. We'll build a leadership force of 600,000 teacherpreneurs, classroom experts who teach students regularly while also serving as teacher educators, policy researchers, community organizers, and trustees of their profession. This will finally blur the lines of distinction between those who teach in schools and those who lead them. Teachers will serve as brokers of learning and experts in defining and measuring student and school success for the public. Teaching will be a well-compensated professional career with differentiated pathways into the classroom. This guarantees that every child has a well-prepared team of educators, led by teachers whose expertise weaves in and out of digital space. There's no time like the present. Policymakers must learn more about the complexities of teaching and invest in teachers in powerful new ways. Teachers' unions need to transform into professional guilds where members meet high performance standards and the skills of teacherpreneurs extend locally and globally. We invite you to join us at www.teaching2030.org to share your ideas and help advance the 21st century profession that every student and our nation deserves.
So let me just stop right there and just put in front of you just this thought. There are about 7 million educators who teach something in the K-12 higher ed system, okay, in this country. Cite National Center for Education Statistics. Most in the K-12 system spend the vast majority teaching kids or serving in some custodial responsibility for those children. So the average teacher in America, the average K-12 teacher works about 54 hours a week. That's average. There's some that work less, obviously. There's some that work a lot more. And most of their time, about 85% of their time inside the school building, sometimes even 90% of their time inside the school building, is in front of children. In our top performing nations in the world, which include Singapore and Finland and several others that I could note, but those are two interesting examples in two distinct cultures, the average teacher teaches about 18 to 20 hours a week at most. Actually has a schedule that's much more on par as university professors, where they both teach as well as lead in a variety of ways and conduct other matters. In many of those countries that I mentioned, Singapore, Finland, and others, almost every person teaches kids at least part of the day or part of the week. So in many of these top performing nations, 60 to 80 to 85% of all educators who are paid by the government to be an educator teach kids. Very typically, principals teach. Only in the very large schools in Finland and Singapore will a principal not teach some. But that's not the case here in this country. I'm gonna pick on John Dacey, not his fault, superintendent of Los Angeles Unified, and highly contentious atmosphere of school reform there. But John's a good man. I am certain of that. I know him. But he's the steward of a system of 72,000 employees. 35,000 of them are teachers. Don't tell me there's not any wiggle room in all that FTE. Smaller school district, not as much luxury perhaps as John in managing FTE differently, full-time equivalents and employees and so forth. But don't tell me we can't figure out a way to cultivate 600,000 teacherpreneurs. And if you caught the video, a teacherpreneur is a highly effective teacher who teaches children regularly, but has time, space, geography, and I like to say reward too, in order to make sure that what they know that works well in their school, in their district, in their community, can spread to others. And they have opportunities to not only teach kids, but use that knowledge of children and teenagers that they experience every day to be edu-game developers, learning architects, assessment experts, policy advocates, policy researchers, online mentors, and the like. We believe that if the public does indeed tell the truth when Gallup calls them about their confidence and trust in the individual teachers, if we could find a way to build an image of the teaching profession upon the work that highly experienced and effective teachers do together in the name of students, then perhaps those images that we've talked about in the first part of this conversation would radically change. So I would like to ask you what you think are the prospects for such a vision of teaching being realized in just a mere 16 years, okay, and about what, 11 and a half months, almost to the day, right? So we'll hit the year 2030 in 16 years when, in 16 days, when you guys in the back row are still not even close to my grand old age of 56. What are the chances? Now remember, in the year 2030, a $1,000 computer will have 1,000 times more power than the human brain. Okay? And these smartphones that are in your pocket right now that you use for social networking and finding the best pizza and beer, it's really good for that, can be used seamlessly to track and record the accomplishments of the kids that you are responsible for as a learning architect. And you could report that data seamlessly to the public, who heretofore has had to listen mostly to statisticians using a 20th century standardized test, right, Greg? Built upon 19th century principles of teaching and learning to determine whether or not school systems are doing its job, or teachers, principals, and even superintendents are doing their jobs. So can I ask you what you think the prospects are? 50-50, okay. So play out, tell me why you're thinking the odds are that good.
I'll give you my optimistic, which is we have technology that can be disruptive and help lead us to these things.
Right.
I'll give you my pessimistic, we have policymakers who will resist changes that make sense because that's not the way they learned how to do school.
Right.
And they'll continue to implement 19th and 20th century solutions to 21st century problems.
Yeah, you're entering guys in the back row of not totally back row, very curious profession, in that almost every American has had a 15,000-hour internship in it, including yourself. No one going into nursing or medicine, architecture, law, engineering, accounting, you name it, has seen the practice of that profession like you have and policymakers have. So that's pretty good. Technology could help and connect teachers, despite the fact we don't have schools designed like Finland and Singapore right now, and teachers can connect to each other in ways they couldn't otherwise, despite the fact that our systems in which teachers work has been designed, basically the 1920s and kind of reified in the 1950s. Any other thoughts beside a 50-50 bet here?
Yes. I put it lower, I'm not sure where, but with the reason that working 54 hours a week in the trenches doesn't give you much energy to reach out.
Right.
To make this kind of leap.
Yeah. So we as a small organization, we're so small, 15 employees and 2,000 teachers in the network, but 354 teachers last year got paid by us in one form as another, as bloggers or online mentors. We also hired 6 teacherpreneurs, one's in the Seattle Public Schools, by the way, who's doing policy advocacy work and building a global network for teachers. And we're trying to build demand for it. What we're doing is a small nonprofit based in North Carolina. But you're right, it'll be very hard to do it without public policy, right? But we need this to happen in order to engage the public so they can rally behind the policymakers or push the policymakers to make the changes. Remember, 71% of the American people love teachers. Politicians would love those numbers, right? Politicians would actually love those numbers. Any other thoughts? Is it crazy what I'm putting out in front of you? Which, by the way, many of these ideas came from your colleagues who are teaching right now. The 12 teachers who work with me on this book range from Renee Moore, a 58-year-old English teacher in the Mississippi Delta, who's actually the daughter of a Detroit's first black police officer and Toronto's first black nurse, and has done civil rights work in the Delta for years. She was on the team. Jose Vilson, a Haitian immigrant who teaches in New York City and serves as a math coach, technology whiz, and poet. To Shannon Sitabaka, a 60-year, Jose's 30 by the way, so he's closer to your age than mine. Shannon Sitabaka, who's my age, one of the nation's first online teachers, award-winning chemistry and physics major who still teaches chemistry online for Iowa Online while she lives in Des Moines and Maui and teaches for Iowa Online. Okay. So these are just 3 of the 12 teachers who work with me. So many of the reason we call these emergent realities, guess what? Now let's go back to your 50-50 or your 30-70. Every one of these ideas is playing out somewhere, if not here in the United States, somewhere around the globe right now. So none of these ideas are totally not feasible, because they are being done. In Singapore, teachers, master teachers, career teachers make more than the principal, who's also well paid, by the way. What do you think the prospects are, Mr. Superintendent? I'll put you on the spot. You're right in my eye shot here.
There's a lot of institutions that will resist that.
Yeah.
And you've named many of them that are just so ingrained of this is how we do it, and this is how we pay teachers, and this is what the school year looks like, and this is what the day looks like. It's extremely hard to shift. So I won't put percentages, but I think a lot of us work every day to try to figure out how to get that next level of change, but you can just feel, centuries pushing back of status quo.
Other fields have been transformed. Okay, you guys have done a little bit of history of education back, right? Can I put you? I'm not gonna put you. This is no grade here. Okay, no grade. And hope I can see there may be a professor looking at you right now. I'm not sure. Don't look at him. But can you suggest from some of maybe the readings that you've done about the history of education why it is much more challenging, as Greg has suggested here, for the industry of teaching and learning to change as opposed to so many other fields that are so dramatically different? Y'all have any thoughts? And then maybe, because the question I'm going to ask you after you answer that, if you can, is what do you think you can do about it? Just go.
I don't know, I'm taking a stab in the dark here.
Oh, that's fine.
But I think that industry has always had kind of a hand in education, and I think that now it's kind of turning to corporations. And I've seen films about how M&M's is now making math curriculum, and it's all kind of a capitalistic consumer kind of agenda that's being pushed on schools. And why would these corporations who are tricking kids into wanting more M&Ms, why would they give up their hold on education?
Well, and budget squeezed superintendents are having to turn to that because they want to fund good programs and pay teachers. And
so
it's not their fault. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So it's hard to get rid of that kind of overseeing eye on education when it's so poorly funded that kind of what you have to do in some cases.
It's in some of the industries and the leaders of those industries that are demanding future workers to matriculate easily and readily in a global marketplace, right? You are right. They resist some of these more provocative ideas. They're not necessarily. You don't see you see some interesting things out of Microsoft and Apple and so forth, but you'll also find those corporations, when they do get involved with schools, they do some very nice things, but they're not totally out of the box, or better yet, they're not even blowing up the box, as suggested as our team has. But the key is for us, is how teachers themselves, despite their 54-hour work week, can be connected, readied, and mobilized to make the difference. Because like I said before, in the very first moments of this conversation, that it will not be handed over to you. It won't be handed over to superintendents either. It won't be handed over to principals. It'll have to be when actually superintendents, principals, and teachers come together in ways they haven't. Can you imagine unions and administrators in this country, Greg, working more hand in glove on matters such as this? And perhaps principals and teachers in particular being seen as less adversaries and as perhaps more apt to work together to advance a new vision for teaching and learning?
I think there's pockets of that all across the country, so I think there's examples out there. Take it to scale is the hard thing, but whether it's charter schools or whether it's private schools or whether it's the TURN network or whether it's certain pockets around the country, I think of examples where that occurs.
Okay, so I know I'm going to put our teacher education friends on the spot right now, since I put the young people on the spot a little bit from time to time. So what might we do differently in ed schools for this, how about if we just, one of the lines I love is blurring the lines of distinction between those who teach in schools and those who lead them. What might ed schools do differently to help get us ready for this new vision?
I think there are pockets of, like Greg was saying, I think there are pockets of it everywhere. If you look at what the Chicago Teachers Union is doing right now, they've really worked hard to build relationships in communities, to bring families in really authentic kind of ways, to advocate for their schools, which totally is a disruption with their administration. It'd be nice if their administration would work in that kind of collaborative scene. I think eventually, if we really are talking about powerful education that serves a democracy, we all have to work together, and we have to keep kids and families at the center. But I think, like this young woman said, I think there are a lot of countervailing forces that really are not particularly interested in having a democratic, a really highly educated, critical, activist student population. So I think the more we can work together and the more we can collaborate in the broader base, that is, it increases our chances of change. But
what about ed schools? What can ed schools do?
Well, I think we're doing it even in small kinds of ways here, but I think it's hard with the work hours we do. I mean, we have small pockets where we're starting to look at schools as the center of the community, where teachers and administrators and teacher educators are working in the schools and a professional development school kind of model. I mean, I think those models exist, but I think we have to change the broader structures in order to support that kind of work, so that it doesn't become a heroic effort like it is those teachers we see.
Right.
We've got to change the way teacher education is done, and it's not a heroic effort, it's part of the system.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of keep my foot on the accelerator here a little bit more. So do you know an ed school in America that prepares teachers and principals together? And what would that do potentially to a future generation of educators in terms of building coalitions, mindsets, collaboration, collegiality? Obviously, it's a leading question, right? Do you know of an ed school that prepares teachers and principals simultaneously? I don't, actually. I was hoping maybe somebody did. I can add it to my list of exemplars. So what do y'all think about that?
There's other ways that we who are in ed school can work with our colleagues. I'm looking at what's happening in Garfield right now.
Right.
Agree with that?
Sure. Well, I've read the news accounts. Pretty easy with the news accounts.
There's that separation. I think certainly here in Woodring, we're working more closely with our public schools in terms of the training of our teachers, that we're spending a tremendous amount of time with our candidates in the schools. I think we also have a responsibility as researchers, and that's part of what we do, to call out poor practice. Especially Garfield, that was $4 million to purchase that test. And I got to stand next to a high school teacher that says, you know, how else could we have spent that money? And I think there's to an extent where I think that those of us who are in the teacher education profession need to be able to provide both sides with data about what works and what doesn't work, and what's good practice and what's not good practice. And that's going to take a whole lot of courage, because teacher education institutions, if we go to a public school and start telling them what they should be doing, rather than providing them with data about what it appears is going on and what alternatives are, we're getting in the way rather than being helpful.
I'm still going that's a very good point, but I'll still press you on how we're preparing principals and teachers in this country. How many principals and teachers in this country, when in their preparation program, are learning about, for example, the organizational development and the resource allocation from Generation Schools? A model using the exact same dollars that the Denver Public Schools receives for its students, and the exact same dollars that New York City receives for its students. That's the two locales where Generation Schools is working, where 90% of the educators in the building teach. The kids get much more extended learning time, some of it in cyberspace. Teachers get shorter work days, okay? Their schedule looks a little bit more like a college professor, not quite that luxurious, forgive me. But compared to a public school teacher, there's a lot more flexibility in a college professor's life, yes. Okay, so they have a little bit more of that there. And they get on top of that 20 days of paid professional development a year. That's all built around curriculum and assessment and leadership. So I'm telling you, there are places in this country that are beginning to do this, right? They've still got a long way to go, but where are our schools of education in helping teachers and future teachers and future administrators know about this, so when they go out into the field, they have something to say about alternatives? I think in my estimation, most people say no, to a reform or a transformation, not because they're afraid of it, but they don't, K-N-O-W. They don't know. Yes, there are plenty of folks who are fighting for the system to maintain its current form and the $600 billion public education enterprise be at the mercy of the textbook and testing industry. There's lots of political machinations that go on so that those who have those contracts continue to get those contracts. There's no question about that, but remember, 71% of the American people have trust and confidence in teachers. So what more can ed schools do?
Well, you're talking about Denver Public Schools. You know, they have long-standing professional development schools where universities in the area, the teacher education programs, faculty members were working in the schools, and the schools are the center. You know, I left there probably 10 years ago. And at that time, they'd gone from a partnership with University of Colorado at Denver to say, we won't work with any of the teacher education programs unless they'll work in a partnership model. Right. So I'm not sure if that's still going, but if it is, that model definitely brings both principals and teachers into the school, and the vast majority of the teacher candidates' time is spent in the school working with not only faculty, but also master teachers in the school setting.
So let's take that example there. So, and there's great work there in Denver, but also around the country. Again, I would say mostly on the heroic backs of individual professors, principals, superintendents, and teachers. But there's no system in place to sustain that type of work over time, like the way, let's say, teaching hospitals are funded in this country, and they're struggling too because of the healthcare issues and finances that are in much flux right now. But teaching hospitals get more money from the federal government through Medicare so that doctors and nurses can both practice what they do and do well, and prepare a future generation of doctors and nurses, like a future generation of teachers. We don't have anything comparable in this country to public policy for training schools that we see in the medical profession. So one of the ideas in the book of ours, where we pose 6 potential levers for change. Of course, one of them, the transformation of unions, but the first or second one, after engaging the public, would be how we can get our K-12 and higher ed system to start using its dollars together. So Greg, what would be the possible, could you take a slice of your budget and a slice of WWU's budget, put it together, build some joint appointments, have more concentrated student teachers in some of your high need schools, or your highest need schools, and give some of the best teachers in your school district a chance to both teach, prepare a future generation of student teachers, and for that teacher to also have a highly revered faculty appointment here at WWU. It's possible.
Oh yeah, especially having their money.
Yes, right.
No, but I think those are conversations that we have. We have like was mentioned, a pretty good relationship in this community, and those are not foreign conversations. To take it to scale, not that.
Well, you would need help from, I don't know if Washington State has a higher ed commission where lots of the higher ed monies are, they're in formula, right? As they kind of filter down into the system. Same thing, the dollars that you receive from both local sources as well as state, filtered through Randy Dorn's shop, right? Some of that, correct? So those things have to change, but anyway. I know you had a question, sir, I think a few minutes ago.
It appears to me that most of the problems that you are mentioning here and the audience here are contributing to about the behavioral aspect of the schools stem from a structural aspect of the schools.
Yes.
With regards to your very observant criticism that teachers and administrators do not see eye to eye, or they have some conflicts, very easily from the managerial point of view, you can solve it. You can have the state legislature come and say, every schools, their teaching faculty, every 2 years should rotate. They become administrators after 2 years, come and teach 2 years teachers. You see, most of the problems which stems from misunderstanding of each other's job.
Yes.
Which eliminate very easily.
Yes, sir.
So why don't they do that?
Well, we used to do it.
Why do they say don't do this?
Here's a little history lesson. Do you know where the word principal came from in its use here in this country? It used to be not a noun. It used to be an adjective. Principal teacher.
So why don't we have it anymore? Why don't we have it? Why did we lose it? Where in the history did we lose that kind of concept? Why teachers should be completely separate, teaching the rest of their lives, and administrators administrating for the rest of their lives?
Well, I guess one academic way to respond to that is that in the grand battle of the early part of the 20th century, one could suggest that Thorndike won and Dewey lost. Now, students, have you all read anything about Thorndike and Dewey? I hope so, just a little bit. But Thorndike was one of the granddaddies, if you will, of psychometrics and using behavioral sciences to make education more efficient. Dewey was about understanding the child and building a system of public education around democratic principles in support of that child. And the historians have written, I'm not a historian, but they have written beautifully and eloquently about this battle. And one would suggest, as Larry Crimmon did, I think in his late 50s, early 60s book, The Transformation of American Public Education. I think maybe even he used that line. Don't attribute that line to me. I think it was Crimmon who said Thorndike won and Dewey lost. So there was obviously an opportunity in this country. But here's what's fascinating about that. Go to Finland, and I had the luxury of being a part of an 8-day study tour of Finland in August with some policymakers from the federal government, a couple of superintendents from California and Delaware, some Highfalutin Foundation program officers who helped pay for some of this trip, which was helpful. And you know what they tell us in Finland about their system of public education and their system of teacher education? That everything that they do there, they learn from, you want to fill in the blank? Us. So Finland, which is well recognized now as one of the most influential countries in delivering on public education, and it have results based upon very rigorous measures of international measures of student achievement, academic achievement. Finland comes out on top, or very near the top, on most of those measures, and have done so for the last 10 years. And they were the country that in the 70s looked more like us as they emerged out of the shadow, as they began to emerge out of the shadow of the Soviet Union. But that said, they say that there are issues of how they prepare teachers, how they do early childhood education, how they do teacher development, how they do principal preparation, Greg. They learn from American educators and American in both universities and the like. As we say down south, go figure.
But they made some structural changes that really have been helpful to do that, because they do a serious apprenticeship model where you begin teaching with a master teacher in a school setting, and you gradually assume more responsibility. You're paid as a professional from the time you start. They have the time that you're talking about to be professionals.
And you told us earlier there's 3.2 million teachers in this country.
Right, yes.
How many are there in Finland?
Well, about the same number as there are those in Washington State. That's the typical critique, and I understand it. But there are 33 states in America that are equivalent size to Finland, give or take a couple 100,000 kids and thousands of teachers. And most of the power, for my young soon-to-be teachers, most of the power, political power, while you get a lot of rhetoric out of Washington, D.C. that has great influence on what states do or don't do and how the media portrays teachers and teaching and superintendents and the like, most of the power is at the state level in this country. It's rooted in our Constitution, where founding fathers, as you probably know, gave pretty much relegated state education to the states, because the feds did not take that on, right? Simple principle from constitutional history here. So 33 states are about the size of Finland.
We can have fun at the later session on that if you like.
I'm sorry?
We could have good fun at a later session comparing those numbers, because I think the superintendent here of the Bellingham School District has to answer not only to the state, but to the feds and to the city and to other constituents as well. So that the pressure, it's like comparing smaller schools. Here, the research that was done on smaller schools and how they tend to be more successful. In terms of scope and size, we've definitely done an industrial model in our country. And the price for that has been very hard to manage, because schools aren't factories.
We've also been giving you a hard time, though, because I think we
I've been
have
much
a lot
more challenging circumstances.
No, seriously though, I think we have a lot of models of what's worked, but I think you're absolutely right that we don't historically have teachers, principals, district administrators, and state people working together with children and family at the center. I think we have all the models available, but I think historically, like even the Garfield teachers are part of a Teaching for Social Justice group in Seattle that's part of a regional group that's part of a national group. And so that collective action definitely makes a difference, but how do we get those teachers working with their administrators and pushing back about some of the things that don't make sense in terms of the policy or how the money is tied to the policy?
Well, I'll give you a response that I typically save for these hard conversations that I have, particularly with union leaders. And they can get even a little bit more edgy, a lot more edgy than this conversation has been. And that is, like the teachers in Garfield, I understand the problems with that test, that assessment, especially at the high school level. But the teachers at Garfield do not have a solution. And oftentimes, when reformers, and most of them, I would say, have the best intentions in mind, there hasn't been accountability. There hasn't been data upon which to make good decisions about who's doing well and who's not. And then those who are the furthest away from kids oftentimes make, most of the most challenging and critical decisions about what that accountability system looks like, what that test looks like, how that test is used. So when the Garfield teachers, much like many teacher unions of the past, say, no, we're not taking it any longer, like remember the character in the movie Network, what was the guy's name? Remember he threw his arms up on, it was 1970, so it was a long time ago. His first name was Howard in the movie, I remember that. But that said, he couldn't take it anymore, right? And basically that's what the Garfield teachers are saying. But what the Garfield teachers, what they don't have is they don't have a solution. Because the public, which is putting money into schools, and I would suggest we ought to put more money into schools, is looking for results. They want to make sure that those that are responsible for those dollars are indeed taking care of those dollars, and what they're doing is in the best interest of helping kids learn. And educators have not been very good at defining the system.
I think you should check out the latest issue of Rethinking Schools, because they're arguing is specifically that all the articles are about the changing the teacher union to become an advocate for students and changing the way we do school. And I think that organization actually has an alternative to how do you monitor school progress other than just the test scores, and how do you monitor
well, and actually other countries do some things very differently. We've done it, there's a small consortium of schools in New York State that are part of what's called the New York Schools Performance Assessment Consortium, are doing wonderful things in that regard as well. But I'm saying at scale, we have yet to galvanize educators to say, okay, this is not working, but they are not ready to say, this is what we ought to do instead. And the public wants accountability. While the public really trusts teachers, I could show you similar slides that suggest that the public also wants to make sure that kids are getting what they deserve. Okay?
So do chess and the disproportionate amount of money that we're spending, if we have 70 some odd percent of the public believes that teachers are doing a good job and have faith in what's going on, does the disproportionate increases in the amount of money we're spending on testing, has that yielded that accountability, has that yielded a significant improvement in student learning? And is the test the best way to measure that?
Well, of course, that's such a broad question. You know, which test, using what metrics? They're good.
The amount of money we're implementing the Common Core standards in Washington State, according to the USDI, the cost to taxpayers for that in the next 5 years. This is online. You can look it up with the OSBI because they presented it to the legislature.
Yes, sir.
Changing the standards will cost us in the next 5 years $167 million to change the standards. So I'd like to know when we had
where's that money going? To change standards, or to change teaching practices, or to change assessments?
A combination of all that.
Yeah.
And changing of textbooks, changing of assessments, $167 million. So I'd like to know when we, and again, I think this is the responsibility of teacher educators to measure this stuff and to hold people accountable in the same way that you're talking about accountable. I'm wondering when we went to the ELers here in Washington State, which are our standards, and then to our glebes, did we have for the amount of money we spent, did we have a significant change in student learning? And so I wonder if we've already spent so much money and we don't have data to show that it was worth that amount of money, would we not be better off having more teachers in the classroom? The 1970 STAR study in Kentucky showed reduce elementary class size to 15 or below, and it doesn't matter what kind of test you have an increase in learning. So I'm wondering, so we got data from the 1970s.
Right.
So,
but you're also posing a very 20th century solution. When students today have access to information, the Google Learner, if you will, they didn't pay for that, so maybe I should ask them to next time. But no, the Google Learner, the 24/7 learning environment that is out there now, that could be capitalized upon. The way we could think about using, well, maybe John Dacey could start thinking about using those 72,000 educators. Now, some of them clearly are serving in custodial roles and responsibilities, probably some security guards, which I'm sure they are needed in LA. But don't tell me that those resources that at his disposal could not be used differently to think differently about how kids are taught, in what configurations, over what period of time. Think about the learning loss, or the learning, better yet, the learning gains that could be achieved if in the elementary level, teachers stayed with the same children for 5 or 6 years.
I think you're actually arguing the same thing. Because basically, in order to do that, if you have to free up the resources to be able to do that. But if you look at, like you're talking about thinking creatively and thinking outside the box about how learning is done, and I absolutely agree with you. And the data you were citing earlier, the Linda Darling-Hammond studies that were done internationally, I mean, it seems like one of the common denominators across those programs that have closed the opportunity gap in short periods of time was really trusting the knowledge of teachers and thinking differently about their work, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yes,
and so in order to do that, and then it builds in accountability. If you have everyone in the school who's teaching and everyone in the school who's working collaboratively, everyone knows who's doing their job and who's not doing their job. And of course, you're going to have measures of accountability to go with that. But the way we now spend billions of dollars on one single measure on one single day, any good educator knows that's not the best way to spend our money. So, I mean, I think you're arguing for the same thing. But
there's still not the alternative. And my point is, until educators figure out a way to stop doing some of the things they're doing now, in some organized way, abandon some of the work that they believe is really, if you thought about it, is not all that important, and then use that time together to come up with some creative solutions, not necessarily the ones that we have outlined in Teaching 2030, but some like those, and then have the evidence, assemble the evidence, and take the case to their public, then we're not going to make much headway in those that are currently, I think, defining who teaches, under what conditions, and for how long, will continue to win the day. Yes, sir.
So there's a prodigy here about, do we even have the right metrics here? We're using all this money to pay for assessments that measure what? And you can do it internationally and say, okay, there is a reasonable comparison, let's say, between us and Finland and Singapore. But ultimately, are we really asking the right questions on these assessments that we spend millions and millions of dollars on to assess our students? And we know there's multiple measures that we could use. But what the disconnect is between policymakers who expect those tests to tell them what they want, which is schools are improving or not. And they don't do that very well.
No.
Right. So that's one of the the issues there. But the other is, you're getting at here is how much time you spend trying to fix a model that inherently, if you could fix it as well as you could, is still not going to be what you want, because it's based on a 19th and 20th century model of learning. This is what I think you're getting at. Whereas we need a 21st century model of learning. How do we free up the space to allow teachers and principals and community leaders and universities working with schools to create and test these new models and do the research on them, and then not expect that that model will transfer from one district to another exactly the same, because we know that next district is different. So these are the issues of what we should probably be looking at. Funding are these models, and the research on how to adapt them to new situations.
The one reason Finland's teacher education system is as good as it is, not that it does things that are all that different than what happens here at WW, even though they have, by the way, young people in the back, putting into place now preparation for teachers who are working with highly mobile children who start school in August, but will not be necessarily in school in May and June. So tools with tracking and supporting them and so forth. They're also helping future teachers work with sick children who come in and out of the system. They're helping teachers learn how to work with using social media. And they're also beginning to prepare teachers with other teachers, prospective teachers in other countries, because they believe Finland's economy rests on its global reach, okay? And they want their teachers to have a global perspective. So these are some, if you went to University of Helsinki, that was what you would experience, as well as some of the things that you're experiencing here at WW. What the point I want to make is that in a country about the size of the state of Washington, there are only 8 institutions of higher ed that prepare teachers. And because there is absolutely hardly any teacher turnover, they only prepare, I believe, about 900 teachers a year, or 1,000 teachers a year in Finland. And that's one reason they spend more money per future teacher, because they don't have to prepare as many. And they also make sure, because they work very closely with the surrounding school districts, so that they're more thoughtful about who they prepare relative to who's going to be needed. So as school districts begin to project, this person, our trend is that we need math people, or we need special ed people, or we need physical education people, that they are communicating that more readily. So the universities are actually recruiting and preparing future teachers that school districts like Greg need, as opposed to preparing any teacher who may or may not be needed by school districts near or far. And only 8 of them. And I think there's, how many institutions that prepare teachers in Washington State? Maybe 25, something like that, maybe. In the home state of North Carolina, a little bit bigger state, 51 institutions that prepare teachers where I live, state of North Carolina. 8 in Finland. 1 in Singapore, by the way. One in Singapore. So, yes, Jenna? Is that a yawn or?
What are we getting out of this excellent presentation?
What are we getting out of it?
Yeah, what are we getting out of it? What I, as a faculty member here, can contribute after this, your excellent presentation, to the better educational system or better education. Frankly speaking, I'm not sure that the tests that we are giving to our students in high school or graduation measures what it should measure today. I think it puts premises on completely wrong things. It does not measure the motivation of the students to go out and help the country. It does not measure the students' motivation to go out to the university for the sake of getting knowledge.
Right.
It sent them to university because their parents tell them. Because the job market says, you don't go to university. There are very, very little motivation to come to seek the knowledge. This is not manifested in the test. No test which are good in Garfield or anything is measuring that. No test is measuring creativity of the students. Okay, this solution, what would you do? No test is, I'm sorry to say, measures the involvement of the United States or the community in the world affair. Nothing.
Yes.
Our students come in complete isolation from what's going on in the world. And you call this assessment according to the scores, as a realistic indicator of the knowledge that the students gain? How would you say on that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. However, ed professors, and I was one for about 9 years, about a decade or so ago, have historically offered up a similar critique in probably a little less contentious times, but if you go back and look at the annals of the history of public education in this country, schools have been often criticized as for many of the same reasons they're criticized today. But ed professors in particular have been very good critics, but not very visible solutioners.
Right.
So I would suggest that you, if I could suggest 3 things that ed schools ought to be doing. 3, work more closely together with your colleagues around the country, because just like the ideas presented here that are built from some actual reality, emergent or otherwise, somewhere around the world, there are ed professors who are doing all the things that they need to be doing, but they're doing it in small silos. So one is to find a collection of other ed professors who can work with you on, one, thinking about preparing teachers and principals together, because I think what divides the profession keeps principals and administrators particularly from working together to build the political will. Not so much on the technical know-how, but on the political will. We got to stop dividing principals and administrators as we have especially in the last 50 or 60 years, in the way we employ them, Greg, but also the way we prepare them. I think future teachers like these ought to have in their hip pocket some good ideas that they can bring to the schools in which they are hired. Ideas that they want to see put in place. And they could be already at this time. They are very good in connecting with each other on Facebook. What can you do to help them get connected to, in the virtual world, with other like-minded, like-valued teachers? And ed schools can do that right now. And then finally, if there's anything that we need from future teachers, it's more knowledge of assessment and getting at these issues, because when it gets down to it, parents aren't very happy with these standardized tests either. But they also don't have an alternative. And if teachers are not good at not just assessing their children, but communicating to parents, to school boards, about what is being learned, what's not, and why, then we're still stuck in the same place we have been for many, many years. So those are the 3 things that I would suggest for ed schools, which I believe at 3 o'clock we have a chance to go even deeper, I believe, with some faculty members that are coming for that conversation. There are a couple of images sitting behind me, just I threw up there, just for your own fun to think about. There's places right now, because many new teachers, by the way, are beset by all the standards they have to teach to and all the lessons they have to build. There are sites now that are designed to help teachers learn from each other and share lesson plans, so you don't have to build something all yourself. Betterlesson.org is one of several good examples. The other one is the teaching channel. One problem that we face in this country is that we have teachers too often siloed in their practices. So you can go there now. I think there are 30,000 videos, about 3 to 5 minutes each, around key concepts, from teaching fractions to 4th graders to teaching physics to high schoolers, particular concepts in physics. I'm interested in working with the teaching channel on a variety of fronts, one of which is how do you make some of that great teaching that's visible in a 3 to 5 minute video for teachers and administrators. How do you make that even more visible to policymakers so they can have a better understanding of what teaching in the 21st century like? I could have 1,000 slides with pictures and images of opportunities and resources for you guys to gravitate toward as you become future educators. I do want to thank you in closing for choosing the profession that makes all of this possible. I guarantee you'll be better prepared than I was some almost 35 years ago when I first started teaching. and find colleagues to stay connected with. That will keep you energized and vibrant, and hope you stay in it for a career and change the profession, and the one that students deserve. So I'm saying thank you very much, and we'll see you.